Welcome back to the Primitive Camping and Bushcraft podcast. My name's Chris Spear, and I'm going to be your guide to enjoying the great outdoors. So today we're going to be diving into an important decision for any camper. What type of shelter to use, tents or hammocks? So with me, and if you followed along with anything that I do or say here lately, you'll know that which one I choose. So this episode right here is not going to be extremely overly cumbersome or extremely long, but let's go ahead and dive right in. So first off, we got tents. Tents are the traditional camping shelter. They have been for years. And, you know, a lot of people, when they think of camping, they visualize a tent next to a fire by a little lake and serene pictures. And, you know, most people do. And I mean, think about the podcast, the artwork for this podcast, you know, is like a serene picture with a little tent off to the left-hand side. But, you know, tents are always going to be visualized, and the first thing people think of whenever they're camping. They've been used forever. They've been used for all the way back in almost the beginning of time. We've used some kind of tents as a shelter. You know, there's different types of tents. Like tents come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and basically it's up to your personal preference, what kind you like. This day and age, you got the one-man bivvy tent. You got the tunnel tent. You've got the big 10-man tent. You've got the Coleman camping tents. You got the canvas tents. The military's used tents for all the wars, and they've made entire bases out of tents. And, you know, tents have always been used, and they will always be used, and they will always be that visual that you pull up whenever you think of camping. And it's just the way it's going to be. So most people visualize camping, the first thing that comes to their mind is a tent. Tents are just like all other gear on the market today. They vary depending on preference. Newer tents are incredibly lightweight and versatile, but you still want to choose the best option for your needs. Large, quote-unquote, family tents can be extremely heavy and are not very fun to carry on a primitive camping trip deep into the woods. But they are nice and roomy, and they have plenty of room for anybody and everybody. So in the little program that I do, where I mentor boys, mentor fatherless boys, and we do is we set up a tent, and we'll have a tent for them and the mentors, and all the boys choose to sleep in there and just cut up all night long until finally I'm like, that's enough, go to sleep, you know. But these tents are roomy. They have a lot of room. You can stand up in them without hitting your head. You know, tents comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes. A small 2-person tent gives the average person plenty of room to lie down. You know, you can sleep comfortably and you can store your gear. Now, recently I was given a tent by a company to show, and I don't have it with me here to show off for the people watching the video. But it was a tunnel tent, and I was like, what is a tunnel tent, you know? And so I started putting it together and, you know, getting it ready for a camping trip. And so I was going to test it out. And we got out there and started putting it together. You had this little tent with this little other cover that comes out and extended past it. And then you put this little floor down, and you have plenty of room for all your gear. They had a sleeping section, then they had a gear section, and it was pretty cool. But tents are just never have been my thing. You know, you got family tents that offer all kinds of roominess, but they're extremely heavy. And when it comes to hiking, if you're going to hike into the woods, a family size tent that you get at Walmart, like a 10-man or 8-man or something like that, is not practical. It's not going to work. You know, a small 2-person tent is easy to carry, but it provides sufficient space for you to put your gear and keep your gear from getting soaking wet in the woods. And whenever you're heading out there anyway, you know, Arctic Adventures, they have specialized tents that keep them from, you know, wind, and keeps the wind out and keeps all their gear in there safe and all that stuff. And, you know, it's just, tents are always going to be the one thing that people think about whenever they head out into the woods. Now, you got these single person tents, and they're like oversized mummy sleeping bags. And I don't care for these because I do have moments where if I get warm, I wake up and I'm kind of claustrophobic, and it's just that is the way it is, like they're lightweight but they're real pricey. And the standard they're more pricey than the standard 2-person tent. And these little mummy tents I guess they're pretty cool if you're into that sort of thing. They have room for you to put your gear and stuff like that in there as well. But when it comes to tents, I am not the tent guy. Now they got canvas tents, and when you talking about the military, like I was a little while ago, canvas tents, although they are heavy, they're very durable, and they're great for making like a base camp. I watched, Buckeye Bushcraft, and old boy did a tent. I believe his tent was, Jake, I believe his tent was canvas tent, and he stayed out there for like 20 some odd days or something till this massive storm come through and it was gone. But it was pretty cool stuff. But canvas tents they were used during the Vietnam and World War II and World War I and all these wars. They've used canvas tents. Now they have different specialized materials that they use. Like whenever I got out of the military, we used to have the what would they call it? EMEDs, emergency medical shelters, whatever. And these things were like there were components. So you have one that you could put them together, and it's kind of like a Lego block. You had this Lego block, which is your base layer, comes with this amount of equipment, blah, blah, blah. And you have 10 or 20 guys on a team. They come out, they put this up, and they can have this whole tent installed in 8 hours, 6 hours, something. I forget the time frame. But you put them together. Then they had add-ons where as each individual group comes in, they put these tents together, and it makes an entire hospital out of these tents. And they were called Alaska tents. They're pretty cool. They had an arch on them. They had a cover on them. They had insulators, and you could put insulation in there. And these tents were pretty cool. They had a big old floor that you put in up underneath there. And when it rains outside, it goes up underneath. They had drains. These tents had it all. And I think they use them for different things as well. But, they've had these tents, these Alaska shelters, what they call them, I believe. And these things been used for a while, and all the way the Gulf War, all the way up to present day. And I don't know. I retired 10 years ago. They probably got something new by now, but who knows? These canvas tents, they're heavy. You're not going to take them with you in a backpack. And so when it comes down to primitive camping, like we've been discussing, it comes down to weight, really. It comes down to what you want to hike into the woods, what you want to bring with you. Now, if you're taking a boat or an ATV or something of the sort, and you're trying to get down river to a place for you to camp, that's fine. Bring whatever kind of camp you want, bring whatever kind of tent you want. It's the same thing when we was talking about gear, was talking about grills. If you want to bring a big old grill, and you're taking an ATV or a horse or, something that is going to convey, like a conveyance is going to convey your stuff from one place to the other, that's perfectly fine. Go ahead and do it. Have more power to you. I've done it. I will bring all kinds of stuff with me in a boat that I wouldn't bring if I was just hiking. That's typical. I'm going to go down in the woods, and, I get out in the water, and I go down in the woods about a mile or two, and if not more, and I will pull over on the bank, and I will then walk several hundred yards from the water or whatever. And I will set up my tent, set up my shelter, not my tent, set up my shelter. I hardly ever use a tent if you haven't noticed. Now, some of these tents that they have, they like oilcloth tents and stuff. One Tigers has some different tents. All these other tents have, like they can accommodate wood burning stoves that offer warmth and cooking and give you all kinds of that capacity inside your tent. Now, standard tents are not going to, little small one-man tents are not going to have a stove or a warm stove or anything like that to keep you warm. So, these things are the key factors in what kind of tent you want to do. And like I said, these are durable base camps. And if you're going to go somewhere and you're hiking in several 15, 20 miles, and then from there you're going to hike in and hunt, you're going to have a base camp somewhere, and these tents are perfect for the base camp. So tarp and rain protection. Adding a tarp over your tent can provide extra rain protection and keep mud out, even if the tent is already waterproof. And I've seen this a bunch of times. You will have a tarp under the bottom of your tent, and then you'll have a tarp above your tent and keeping the rain and everything away. But tents in cold weather can produce condensation. And that's not ideal if you have sensitive equipment like cameras and stuff like that. Condensation, electronics and stuff like that. Condensation, it actually it contributes to the growth of mold, and it actually is bad for electronics because that condensation can get in there, and whenever you get in the cold or whatnot, it can ruin it, render it useless. So, let's move and change gears. Now that we talked about tents, let's swing over, and let's talk about some hammocks. All right. Hammocks are, I realize, all right, before y'all start eating me up, I realize that hammocks are not going to be 4-season camping gear items, and I realize that because, down here I could use it for 3.5 seasons of the year. There's a couple, like a 1 or 2 month stretch that, a hammock's going to be miserable to camp in because it's going to be freezing cold. I get it. I understand it, and I've done it, and I have all kinds of underquilts and stuff like that too. But when I head out into the woods, I usually camp with a hammock because it's simplicity. It is 100% the easiest way. Just plop, plop, set up, put your tarp over top of it, and you're done. You have a shelter system ready-made. And then, we'll get into the tarps above here in a bit. But it's simple, it's comfortable, and since, I'm not keen to sleeping on the ground with getting my, I'll wake up, I'll sleep on the ground, and I'll wake up feeling like, oh my God, all this, I'll have things hurting that I didn't even know I had, and that's the problem with me sleeping on the ground. That's why I choose to sleep on the hammock. For some reason, sleeping on the ground kills my back. It doesn't matter if I have if I have a good mat or a good air mattress. I wake up all stiff as a board, and my back's killing me every time I sleep on the ground when I get out into the woods. So I choose to sleep on the hammock. Now, what I have found here recently, and I don't have it nearby, but what I found recently is the lay flat hammocks, and those are pretty cool. And you get your lay flat hammock, you put it on there. It was pretty cool. I did enjoy that. That was a good night's sleep. I laid flat. It was comfortable. The only thing was hot. And I just recently did a review on that. It's the Nightcat lay flat hammock, and it was on my YouTube channel. I did a whole review on that, and I did a camping trip where I kayaked overnight down the river. Y'all can check that out on my YouTube channel. But that's it. Hammocks are my way to go. So when you get down to hammocks, you're going to want to put some kind of tarp over your hammock. And so the best way to do that would be an A-frame or a diamond fly. Some of your hammocks have bug nets. Some of them, have their own ridge lines that you have to put up and stuff for the bug nets and such like that. But you compare a hammock with a shelter configuration like an A-frame or a diamond fly, and that is going to keep all the weather off of you. You can actually lower it down where it will keep the wind. It'll deflect the wind, and then you can raise it up where it just keeps the rain. In the summertime, what I did is I kind of made like a modified lean-to to where it come down on one side and then it has a slope ridge on the front. And I do that because it allows the air to come in whenever I'm sleeping in a bug net, because it doesn't matter if it's in August and you got a bug net, you're not going to sleep with a sheet or a blanket or anything like that, but you will suffocate to death in there, even with a bug net, if there's not enough airflow. You can be down by the water when you're kayaking and you have that wind hitting you in the face and constantly blowing because there's nothing to stop it on the water. But as soon as you get on the bank up into the woods, then you're going to have all kinds of stale, stagnant wind, no wind, So, most of the time when you have a hammock, you're going to want to have a bug net. And most hammocks now have bug nets built into them. So when we're talking about tents, most of the tents have a tarp that go on the top of it. And underneath there, they have the bug netting. And so that keeps all the mosquitoes and all of those other little bugs out. But and the same thing with the hammocks. Hammocks do the same thing. They have bug nets that you hook up on a ridge line just under where you're putting your tarp. And so whenever you get your bug net ready to go, you climb up in there. You don't feel like you're suffocating because the ridge line's holding it up. Now, when you're cold weather camping, these these things are pretty cool because they have underquilts. Now, a lot of people will be like, "Look, Dave, you're adding stuff to this now, and you're adding weight to my backpack." But no, not really, because an underquilt is extremely lightweight, and it really does help in whenever you're cold weather. So remember earlier when I talked about how you can camp out here 3.5 out of 4 seasons? Well, with a underquilt, you can actually camp all year round in a hammock. Now, what I've done with an underquilt before, and I camped out where it was like, in the teens, is I'll put the underquilt on and then I'll have a wool blanket underneath my back. I'm laying down on a wool blanket and then I'll cover up in a wool blanket. And that will keep you nice and toasty. And most of the night I had to take the wool blanket on top of me off a little bit just to cool off because it started getting a little too warm. But a wool blanket with an underquilt is an amazing thing. Underquilts, in colder weather, an underquilt is an essential for keeping warm while sleeping in a hammock. If you don't have an underquilt in cold weather while you're sleeping in a hammock, that you're going to be zapped. It's going to take all the warmth out of you. That air is going to flow right up under you. What's it called? Induction, convection, something like that. I forget the word. It's in here somewhere. But it is going to actually zap all the cold air or the warmth out of you. Same thing with sleeping on the ground in a tent. If you're sleeping on the ground and it's kind of cool outside and you're not sleeping on a air mattress or some kind of insulative mattress or pad, that ground is going to suck all the warmth out of you, and you're going to freeze to death. So, sleeping position, when you're in a hammock, you want to lie diagonally in your hammock, and that's going to eliminate most of the curve that people find uncomfortable. So if you lay down in your hammock and you're laying diagonally, it's going to take some of that banana bow out. A lot of people are like, I don't like sleeping in a hammock because it really makes me feel like a banana. Well, if you lace it catty-cornered like that, it's going to actually eliminate that curve. So comparing tents to hammocks. All right. Protection from the elements, both tents and hammocks, when paired with a proper shelter configuration, provide equal protection from the elements. So if you're out there with a tent, you put a tarp over your tent, it will actually help keep it even more. You can use a tent without a tarp over it, absolutely, but you put a tarp over it, and it will actually be better for you in the long run. And the same thing with, the key difference is that tents can be staked to the ground while hammocks rely on guy lines for tension. So, your tent is going to be staked to the ground, and your hammock is just going to have guy lines holding your tarp to the ground. So hammock shelters, you have to, like I just mentioned, use guy lines, and they help stretch your shelter wider or narrower depending on the weather. So the typical guy lines are about 6 feet long, using overhand loop knots, which I like to use, or bunt line hitch to secure them. I typically use overhand loop knots because I know when I'm attached to a tarp, that is going to be attached to that thing permanently, and not permanently, but semi-permanently. I'll have it on there and it'll stay on that tarp. And then the guy line, I'll be able to make tensioners, which is going to hold my tarp in the area that it needs to. So let's talk about knots. So I use an overhand loop knot to attach one end to my tarp. And then the other end I put to a stake, and I'll use a bunt line hitch or, something, a taut line hitch or something like that to actually, secure my fly over my hammock. And then for a tight, secure guy line, I use a prusik knot with a toggle. So on my guy lines, I will put my ridge lines. I'm sorry. On my ridge lines, I will use a prusik knot with a toggle to hold my tarp to that ridge line. And then my guy lines, I will actually use overhand loop knot and then a taut line hitch, and that will hold that thing down and keep it in the configuration at which I want to keep. Now, when we get out into the woods, there's some things that we're going to have to know, both tents and hammocks have their advantages and challenges. The right choice depends on your personal preference and the camping conditions. You want to really decide which one you like. My brother cannot stand a hammock. I cannot stand a tent. I will sleep in a tent if I got to, but he will not sleep in a hammock. He can't do it. So we're going to get into the next episodes here. We're going to get into deeper and more advanced camping shelters. So let's go into that. And the next one, I believe, we're going to start going into more knots. And I mentioned the prusik knot and the guy lines and the ridge lines and stuff. So I believe in the next episode, we're going to actually tell you how to make these knots, how to use these to set these up for your tarp shelters, for your tents. Now, coming up in a couple episodes after that, we're actually going to go step by step, and you can follow along in the book, Primitive Camping and Bushcraft, but we're going to go step by step how to make certain shelters out of the tarp that you brought with you into the woods. And we're going to use these knots that we're talking about to do this. And I have clear demonstrations in here how to make the prusik knot and how to use toggles, and also how to make guy lines, how to make trucker's hitches and stuff like that. So we're going to go over that step by step coming up here soon. So if you're interested in learning more, make sure you go by and pick up a copy of the Primitive Camping and Bushcraft book. It's available on all major retailers, and especially Amazon. So if you're interested in that, and if you're watching on YouTube, I should have a link in the description for the book. Same thing with the show notes for the podcast. And I hope y'all found this somewhat helpful. If you did, go ahead and hit that like button. Go ahead and leave a rating for the podcast on whatever podcast provider you're listening to. Give it a thumbs up and just let me know how well it's going. Leave me a comment and let me know what's going on and what you think. So, all right, next time we're going to get into some more advanced techniques, and I will see you then. Thank you so much for joining me. God bless you.